I'm Lesley Riddoch and welcome to Thursday's Referendum TV. Well, thanks to our perfectly formed audience once again here in the Hill Street Theatre. We are in the programme today looking at all sorts of shock horror news. The shock horror news that the Bank of England does indeed plan for a shared currency, that Trident might be moved without costing half the earth, that there are oil fields west of Shetland. We'll also be examining childcare and the claims made for it after independence. We'll be looking at the women's vote, how the Catalans and the Irish in Scotland are planning to vote. We'll be talking to graphic designer Stuart Bremner and talking to the guys behind the film Scotland Yet. So plenty to be talking about. A jam-packed programme. Do you know we always say that on TV and radio? It has never been so true. And to that end, I'm delighted to be joined by my fellow mucker, pal and journalist, Iain MacWhirter.
Good afternoon.
Who is hot fat foot back from Shetland, showing no signs of the damage. We're just going to move straight to our usual little look at the papers. I'm chucking in cheekily one which is particularly of interest to me, perhaps to no one else in the universe. Radical proposal to create 100 local Scottish councils. Those of you who have lived through the Blossom experience, the book I wrote, will know that I've been banging on about this need for having smaller councils for quite some time. COSLA actually set up a commission on strengthening local democracy, and what their folk are saying now is really, to me, is very heartening to hear this beginning to be said by something in officialdom in Scotland. I just want to read this little quote and then we'll pass on. One source who's close to the commission said, it's a choice between a Scandinavian opportunity or a Tesco-style local democracy where the only thing which matters is price. This isn't about nutty councils wanting to collect stamp duty. It's about systems in place in Scandinavia where the same equality gaps in Scotland don't exist. But it's difficult to throw off the view in Scotland that efficiency always overrides democracy.
Yeah, it's very strange that, because the debate here is always about the same thing. We've got too many layers of government, we've got too many councils. We should merge them all. We should merge the police forces and have a national Scottish police force. We should merge fire and ambulance services and what have you. And this is very rarely gets discussed at all. In fact, Britain is perhaps unique in having such a centralised system of local government. And you see in France, and not just in Scandinavian countries, but in France, how valuable it is having thriving local democracy, because they keep rural areas populated apart from anything else, and they actually have a political voice.
Well, and the turnouts are massive. I mean, our turnouts here, 30% on average for local council elections, 70% across Europe, 80% in the Nordics without compulsion. That does a big shot in the arm for democracy. And then when you move to a bit more of a marathon, which is what we're currently doing with the independence referendum, you don't have people coming from a standing start, which I think is a real problem in this referendum. Anyway, we've got lots on the economic front today as well. And strangely, as you were pointing out earlier, Iain, a lot of it on social media and on Twitter rather than the headlines today, and on radio. But here's one in the Times, not sure if you can see it. Blow to Yes campaign as figures show a slump in projected North Sea oil revenue. Now that's a curious old one, because the words St Clair fields have been flying around at the same time. You've just come back from Shetland, so what's your thoughts on the oil revenue?
There was this, in the social media there was this conspiracy theory that David Cameron, when he was up in Shetland, had been trying to hide the fact that the Clare field was booming and there was lots more oil had been discovered. I think there's no secret. I mean, you go up to Shetland and you see the place is booming anyway. I mean, there is another investment boom in the North Sea, and that's why you get these headlines about oil revenues collapsing. That they're down to about 4.5 billion. They were up at 11 billion only a few years ago. But the reason the oil revenues are declining is because there's an investment boom in the North Sea, precisely because they're opening up new fields and extending existing ones. And if you speak to Oil and Gas UK, to be fair, they're absolutely clear about this. They say there's another boom in the North Sea coming. There's 1.5 trillion or so wholesale value of oil still left in the North Sea. And if you go up to Shetland, I mean, there are more people, there are more workers there living on these barges, floating ships, floating hotels around Shetland than there are actually in all of Shetland's hotels and B&Bs. That's a measure of the boom that's taking place there. So the idea the oil is running out, I'm afraid, it just doesn't stack up. And Professor Donald Mackay, who's you'll probably also be talking about, he's saying there's still a mountain of black gold out of the North Sea, which may be exaggerating a little bit, but you know, I kind of know where he's coming from.
Well, you could talk about this, or actually the other headline, which is on the Scotsman, which is Carney ready for a run on Scots banks after yes. This is Mark Carney, the head of the Bank of England. Now, actually, you could look at it really quite differently, the announcement yesterday, which seemed to suggest that actually, shock horror, the Bank of England has actually been planning for a potential shared currency.
Well, not exactly. I mean, what they're saying is that they're making contingency plans for a possible run on the Scottish banks, which they say is caused by uncertainty about the future of the currency. And that the uncertainty of the currency, obviously, is largely because the UK government has ruled out there being any possibility of a currency union. And therefore, there is a fear that investors might take fright, that people will be worried their pensions are not secure, and they might start whipping money out of their bank accounts north of the border and shoving it into bank accounts south. I mean, it is slightly artificial for two reasons. One is that the Scottish banks are also the biggest Scottish banks, RBS, Bank of Scotland, Lloyds. They're also the UK's biggest banks. So if there's going to be a run of the banks in Scotland, it's going to be very odd because people are going to be taking money out and putting it back into the same bank. Now, I don't really subscribe to the run on the banks theory. If there is chaotic financial disintegration after a yes vote, then clearly you could be in the kind of situation that happened in former Czechoslovakia, where there was a run on Slovak currency, because people were betting against Slovakia being as economically dynamic as the Czech Republic. But hey, what happened there, of course, was that Slovakia rapidly expanded, became one of the fastest growing new countries in Europe, and if anything, is now outflanking the Czechs on the currency front and economic front.
Looking at the poor old terrorist Icelanders, when they had their experience of the banking collapse in 2008, they very cleverly used that potential to change the direction of trade, encourage everyone to come on the basis that you could now buy a packet of crisps and a pint of beer and not need a mortgage for it in Iceland. Icelandair shifted all their traffic to bring more people in as tourists, which actually boosted the economy. It's never over till it's over with these questions. But
and it's also the artificiality of it's very frustrating because the UK government keeps saying, no, we're not going to have any pre-negotiation, we're not going to discuss what's going to happen, we're not even going to contemplate the possibility of independence, but then they send out these signals saying, oh look, no currency union, so there's going to be a big crisis, and then you have the Bank of England saying they have to make contingency plans for this, that and the next thing. So I do feel that is, it's a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, and this whole thing in the currency union was designed to create a climate of financial insecurity in Scotland and encourage Scottish banks and businesses to leave after independence. And I think that's been very unfortunate.
And you talked as well of Donald Mackay's report this morning. Can you kind of go through what you think of the significant parts of that? Because it doesn't seem to appear in any of the papers this morning.
No, I'm very surprised at that because he's a very reputable economist. And he's signed a letter with a number of other economists to the Financial Times saying that he just doesn't accept, well, first of all, like many contributors, he thinks a currency union is the obvious and practical solution for Scotland and England, not just for the benefit of Scotland's economy, but for England's as well. But he's also criticising the Office of Business Responsibility, the UK OBR, which came out with this report saying, the oil's running out, it's volatile anyway, and basically it's a curse. And he's saying, no, that's utterly ridiculous. I mean, any way you look at it, there's still about 40% of the oil still left in the North Sea. They're saying that the oil price is unlikely to go below $100 a barrel for the foreseeable future, and this is an incredibly valuable resource. I mean, what kind of a dowry could any country possibly want than 1.5 trillion of these extremely valuable hydrocarbon resources?
He was saying on Radio Scotland this morning, I was hearing him say that actually the OBR hadn't talked to anybody in the oil industry about their views.
Yeah, exactly. Well, as I said, Oil and Gas UK, which is the industry body here, to give them the full credit, they are very straight about this. If you go and ask them, as I have repeatedly, and say, look, everyone's saying the oil's running out, is this right? And they say, no, it's not. There's actually there's an investment boom taking place in the North Sea at the moment. I mean, it's not like the 1970s. A lot of these are very mature fields, and it's more expensive and more difficult to get the oil out. That's perfectly true. Nevertheless, the money is pouring into the North Sea, and that is why in the short term there's a dip in revenues, because of course that when companies invest in the North Sea, they get tax concessions, so that's why the revenue is nominally declining. But that means it's going to increase in future.
Mm-hmm. And yet, I mean, clearly it looks as if people are still freaked completely. You know, we could rehearse these arguments. I think we have now heard both sides of these arguments ad nauseum. And yet, it doesn't seem to allay the fear of people who just seem freaked at the notion that some sort of utter cast-iron guarantee cannot be given now by Alex Salmond, let's face it.
Absolutely.
And he's got another debate, August the 25th. I mean, we're looking forward to, are we?
I fear it'll be just the same.
Will it be more of the same?
I fear it will be, yeah, because you know, this is the best time. We have discussed this before. You know, it's you know, there's uncertainty if you're going to set up an independent country. Obviously, there's going to be uncertainty about exactly, you know, what its status is going to be in the world and what its economic resources are going to be. And into that uncertainty, it's very easy for, you know, for unionists. And it's perfectly. There's no unfairness here. They're perfectly entitled to come in and say this. They say, well, all these uncertainty. You don't know what your currency is going to be. You don't know what the oil's worth. You know, the population is going to be aging in Scotland. That's going to cause financial problems.
I know this might sound crazy, but I was thinking about this recently, about how one might sort of gainsay an argument like that. You can't do this in that kind of prime time slot. But I was thinking about, for example, you know, I have travelled to Mallaig, I don't know how many times in my life, probably 80 to 100 to go across to Egg. Do I know the A number of that road? No, I don't. It could be the A85. I always forget because it doesn't, you know, it's not so important. I know every twist and turn of that road, but actually on some of those things, I couldn't actually say for sure, you know, those details of it. And to an extent, you know, the unknowable is unknowable. A lot of it has been fleshed out by work people have done in the interim. But this kind of cast-iron certainty, the need to be able to name the actual road, we're never going to be able to get there. But why is Alex Salmond, you know, in a sense, allowing that kind of debate to develop? How do you think he should handle August the 25th?
Well, I think partly because he's trying to, you know, avoid emotionalism. He doesn't want to be appearing to sort of whip up ethnic or cultural, you know, antagonisms, which is why they've tended to limit the argument to an economic one. I mean, there's a very obvious reason for this, which is that Scots, until very recently, I've never had to consider political independence. It's a very recent phenomenon in Scottish history. Scotland's not like Ireland. We haven't had there wasn't a century of political opposition to the Union. Scots were very much part of the Union, very enthusiastic members of the Union in the 19th century and even after the Second World War. So for Scots, I mean, for most independence movements, it's simple. You want freedom from foreign oppression. That's what all independence movements. You know, there's nearly 130 countries that become independent since 1945. In not one of them has currency been remotely an issue. People, when they're wanting freedom, they don't worry about what pound, the coin they're going to be using in the future. They just want the foreigners out. Now, that's not the situation in Scotland because Scots don't feel oppressed by England. And to give him credit, Alex Salmond doesn't want to pretend. He doesn't want to generate antagonisms or try to suggest in any way that Scots are oppressed by England. They're not. You know, we have civil rights here. It's a democratic country. There's no problem. But that's why it's been reduced to economic issues, I think.
Yeah. Well, let's move on and speak to our next guest, who is Professor John Davis, who's Professor of Childhood Inclusion at the University of Edinburgh. Hi there, John. Everybody's kind of slightly thinking childhood inclusion, independence referendum, but actually, of course, one of the biggest policies that is the keynote policy, really, and guarantee of a post-independence Scotland is that there will be free childcare, never mind just affordable, but free childcare, for which will transform, hopefully, the situation for early years in Scotland. Now, how do you think that well, first of all, tell us a bit about that promise. Do you rate it?
Yeah, I do, and the reason I rate it is because it comes from within the sector. So people say Alex Salmond did this, it's a tokenistic gesture towards women. But those of us who've been working in the sector for the last 10, 20 years, we went to the government and said, this is what we're looking for. There's been a series of reports, including one by the University of Edinburgh, another colleague involving Kate Tisdall and Children in Scotland, setting out what the key steps need to be. So it didn't come from the SNP, it came from people in the sector doing research, thinking about it. And I think there's a really important, you were saying about freedom a minute ago. There's another issue here in this referendum, and it's about social justice. A lot of people have linked social justice to poverty, but there's another aspect of social justice, which is recognition. And what people would like in our sector is recognition of the efforts that we have made over the last 10 years to improve the quality of the sector and to put forward our own ideas about how we would like it to change. Now, in the media world, they don't want to pick up that story. But there's a fantastic story, and the next thing I need to add is, isn't it interesting that the media don't want to represent a really good, strong story and positive that's about, vast majority of people who've increased the quality in this sector are women. So why don't they want that story out there?
Well, actually, you've put numbers on this. You sent us an email, actually. I think you saw us on TV, which just goes to show that, it's always worth responding and getting in touch because we read everything. But you were pointing out that there are 30,000 people currently working the sector, and you think 35,000 will be needed post-referendum, and you're saying they should all be voting yes if they've got their heads screwed on.
Well, not just them, actually, not just the people working in the sector. The people working in the sector might want to vote yes because there'll be a massive shift in resources. And one of the big issues that's still outstanding from the strike 10 years ago is an issue of pay and conditions and whether they've caught up with other professionals. So for in the sector, vote yes because increased pay and conditions will most likely come. But actually, for young people out there who want to work with children, this is the best job opportunity of a lifetime. Yeah, we're going to need 35,000 new workers. We're going to need lecturers in universities to run the courses for these. Every professional working in the sector has to have a qualification. At basic level, they have to have an HNC. The leaders have to have degrees. And what we're looking to do, and what the Children of Scotland report was calling for, was actually moving that up to the leaders in the sector having a master and every professional having a degree. And there is the possibilities for that to happen. Why do we think that will happen? Because those of us in the sector know that 10 years ago, only 55% of people had qualifications. Now, 89% of people have qualifications, and the other 11% are working for qualifications. Nobody's telling that story. Why?
Well, John, you're doing it today big time. Just to look at the costings of it, I mean, the question that's been asked very often is, well, if it is such a great thing, why don't you do it now? I think probably people do appreciate you need to have a little bit of room for manoeuvre in a budget to make big changes. But are you confident that that pledge, and tell us exactly what it is as well, free childcare for whom? For what ages?
Yeah, it's 1,140 hours for 3 to 4 year olds and vulnerable 2-year-olds in the first Parliament, and then moving that on in the second Parliament for children aged 1 up to school age. So that's the shift. At the current time, we have 475 hours, changing this August to 600 hours.
Can we turn that into what people would understand? I mean, is that basically all the time that you need?
Yeah,
but is it covering, for example, summer holidays?
Yeah, well, what the Children and Young People Act has asked for is for local authorities to consult parents on when they want that childcare to be available, so it should be flexible. There's another aspect of the sector that people don't talk about. There are 3 types of childcare. There's voluntary, private, public sector. Yeah, so there is a mixed economy, and some parents at the moment sometimes have 2 providers because of the times aren't available. So that's the kind of thing we're looking to make it easier for parents to have their childcare the way they want, and every 2 years local authorities have to report on what achievements and gains they're going to make.
You know that we've had a lot of arguments about personal care, which has been administered in the same way, and you know that there was earlier this month a story, in fact just last week, wasn't it, stories of women saying, mothers mostly, saying that they actually couldn't get in anywhere in certain local authority areas.
Yeah, and those were people looking for full-time childcare. Yes, so it was beyond what's available at the moment. So if you really want to address issues of full-time childcare, you need this movement up to 1,140 hours. Yeah. So again, it's another reason for voting yes. Really interesting that the press ran it as a scare story against the SNP.
Yeah.
When in fact the solution looks to be voting yes and possibly voting SNP. I'm not sure.
Speaking of what Lesley was saying, though, that could this policy be introduced under the powers of the existing Scottish Parliament under devolution?
You could, but where would you get the money? And what really I find the irony is, as an ex-member of the Labour Party, a lot of my friends are still in the Labour Party, throwing knives at the screen at the moment.
Never.
They'll come up and say, well, you could have done this already. But did they not notice that they caused a recession? We have problems with financing. Yeah? If we were to make financial gains, they would go into the exchequer. Yeah, I think the SNP's argument that's fairly clear, and I accept it. So,
but I suppose the cynics, really, John, will think, come independence, okay, we will have our hands on more levers, there will be more possibilities of shifting tax around, but here's the thing, every time that a macho society, and I'm sorry, Scotland is one at the moment, has had the opportunity to put children or women first. It has not done it. Now, why would we suddenly change overnight to become a different sort of society? You know, a sort of Nordic-facing feminine society that wants to put children first just because the vote's been done. That's the suspicion that's probably lurking.
Yeah, and I think it's true, but I think, have you not noticed something as well? There's been a shift that's happening in Scotland at the moment. Myself and my colleagues wrote papers for the Common Weal, and there's some kind of slight change in politics happening, that anything is possible in this debate, yeah? Now, I would ask you this: show me a politician that you would trust to deliver on any promise. You know, if we want them to deliver, we have to create the pressure after the yes vote. This is not about whether they deliver. If we don't have the yes vote, they can't deliver, is the way I feel. Now,
Of course, it's partly written into their economic prospectus, because what the SNP are saying is that one of the ways you address this problem of the ageing population, and therefore the financial deficit, is you enlist very large numbers of women into the workplace. And this is the kind of policy which would release them to be employed, and that would actually have an economic benefit in itself.
But this is something they've picked up particularly from Denmark, actually, who's, and in fact all the Nordics who've had that motivation, when particularly, well, Norway, when they needed to have more workers, and because the Nordics don't have empires like us, they weren't able to draft in lots of immigrant labour from the 70s to the 90s when they started to gear up in industrial terms, so they needed women to get back to work. And unlike this country, where basically the stick is used far more often than the carrot in life, they realised they needed to provide a really good incentive. But the question I'm interested in, that I haven't really got an answer from the SNP about, is that in all the systems that I know about in the Nordic countries, it is still a contributory system, actually. So it's not very much. You can get a full-time kindergarten place in Norway, for example, for basically £200 a month. That's the maximum anyone can pay. And their currency being twice as strong as ours, that's basically £100 a month. Now, I know there's people in this city, in Edinburgh, paying £1,300 a month.
Well, exactly. In Quebec, it's $5 a day.
But the point is, the contribution seems to be, you know, when I've spoken to Norwegians about it, the contribution seems to be important. It also creates just extra cash to make sure you get excellent childcare, not just so-so, but it helps to raise the standard. Now, why are the SNP so determined to have free or nothing, if you see what I mean? Why not be able to make something contributory?
I mean, they have to speak for themselves, don't they?
And also put, in effect, the right in the child, because these other societies have the right that inheres in the child to a kindergarten place. They don't have this complicated, if you're this, then you get 100 hours, if you're that, you get, you know. I just wonder if you have any thoughts on
I think, to be fair to the SNP, is they've had to introduce a staged approach from very little and from low quality quite a few years ago. So, but what's really good about the recent Growing Up in Scotland study is we're finding that the quality is the same across public, private and voluntary sector. There are some shifts and changes if we went into the complexity of it, but generally they're finding they get the same type of childcare, which is that shows that the qualifications are having an impact in this field. So for me, it's more about looking at what's the positive story here. What does it tell us might happen afterwards? It tells us we can rely on this sector to pull up their sleeves, to improve quality. And now the debate so much in Europe is moved on from what hours and how are they funded to what's the quality of the hours.
It is.
And the big shift we've achieved in Scotland is an increase in quality, and nobody tells that story. So the thing for me is that we do have to put our hands up and say there's some gaps. Yeah. So there are gaps at the moment in terms of the amount of men in the system. But again, what the research shows you, if we actually increase the pay that goes to people in the sector, more men will move into the sector.
That's true.
So, but we have to be wary of that as well. But I think there's a point where this becomes an issue about whether or not we want to see ourselves as a certain country. But one thing I have to say about this Nordic, just to finish it off, is we do have to remember that we were one of the first countries in the world and in Europe to have an early years system. Yeah, we don't have to parachute all the ideas in from outside. There have been problems in other systems too, like Denmark, where they shifted early years into schooling and there was schoolification. So we have to celebrate what the people in this sector know about how to deliver high quality childcare and ask them how they want to shift. And I think in your recent book, you're sort of hinting at that, about different ways to do politics, where local people start making decisions. And I think that's the next stage of this. It's really exciting. Let's ask people in the sector what their solutions are.
Amen to that. Thank you very much indeed, John.
Thank you very much for that. Now, back to the referendum. But there's another referendum taking place on independence. It's taking place in Catalonia, the autonomous region of Spain. And interestingly there, unlike in the UK, where the UK government endorsed the referendum and said it would be done by agreement, in Spain, Madrid has said, no, you're not going to have a referendum on independence. You're not allowed to secede from the Spanish state. So we're going to talk about that now with Jordi Arafat, who is the project manager of Diplocat, which is a kind of Catalonian version of the British Council. So please give a warm welcome to Jordi Arafat. So Jordi, tell us, what's the state of play in the referendum in Catalonia?
Well, the situation right now is very enthusiastic. People is very excited because for the first time in many years Catalan people can decide their political future, which is something that generates a lot of enthusiasm all across the society in Catalonia. The only problem is that, as you have said before, the Spanish state doesn't seem to want to cooperate with the Catalan government in order to organize this referendum. Why all this happened? This all happened when in 2006 the Catalan government, the Catalan parliament decided to approve a new statute of autonomy, which is what we call a home rule.
Statute of autonomy.
Yeah, it's similar to a home rule here.
Yeah.
And this statute was approved by the parliament, was approved even by the Spanish government at the time. It was approved by referendum by the Catalan population, but the then opposing People's Party, non-owning government, they decided to bring this new statute, this new home rule, to the Constitutional Court.
Mm-hmm.
And 4 years later, the Constitutional Court said that most of these articles were not valid.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like a small court appointed politically of 12 judges can determine the future of our nation, even if it has been decided and approved by a referendum, by our parliament, and even by the Spanish parliament. So people realized that there was a kind of lack of democratic quality there in Catalonia, and suddenly in the next year support for independence rise from 20-30% to 50-55%, which is the level we are now.
So that's still pretty much the yes, if you like. It's
yes,
very much in the
exactly. This is what the polls said. Moreover, there is 80% of the Catalan people who supports the idea of holding a referendum.
Yeah.
And even the Catalan parliament, around 70% of the members of parliament support that.
So why is Madrid so determined to oppose it? Because obviously, with the history of Spain, we had, anti-democratic governments, fascism as recently as the 1970s. Surely it's a democratic right of the Catalonians to decide their future.
Well, you have to understand that we are in the current context of the early 21st century. In the early 21st century, it's not like 30 or 50 years ago. No, small nations can get on very easily. It's not like 100 years ago, if you were a nation, you needed a bigger nation or a bigger partner next to you to ensure that the nation next door will not invade you.
You mean it's the age of the small nation?
Exactly. Now it's the time we're living now. In this moment, all the policies you can control that are close to you, like the health, the education, the social policy, the closer the policy, the entity is to, the smaller it is, the more efficient you manage that.
Can I just say as well, in case people don't know, I was astonished to find that there's 4 or 5 Catalan language newspapers, isn't there? And you also have a Catalonia language television station.
It is.
Which is like your BBC.
Exactly.
So that's a big difference actually, because in a sense, culturally, you've got, you're sort of in control basically of much more than Scots are, to be honest.
You have a national media as
exactly.
already.
This is a very important point. In fact, in the rest of Spain, there are 2 channels that are the most widely seen, which is Telecinco and Antena 3, whereas in Catalonia it's TV3, TV3, the television they preferred by the population. But something I have forgotten to say, people doesn't want the referendum just because our home rule has been contested. It's also because we feel that we pay too much taxes to Spain, We are one of the 3 first autonomous regions in Spain in paying taxes, and we receive a lot less.
Yeah.
And moreover, we also feel that we are being harassed or threatened by the current government in Madrid, attacking our language and public education system.
The language is very important.
It is very important for us.
That's a big difference with the UK, with Scotland, which doesn't have that language issue. But tell us, what's going to happen then if you go ahead with the referendum and it's a yes?
If we want to go ahead with the referendum and it's a yes, then what it's supposed to do, like Spain is the Western democratic country.
You think they'll recognise it in the end?
Yes, it is. It's just that there is not the same quality of democracy that is somewhere else. But look at what happened in Canada. In Canada, there was no a right for Quebec to secede. But the Constitutional Court there agreed that in case of a yes, there will be negotiations between the Canadian government and the Quebec government. This is what we expect us to happen.
Yeah, international
Can I
law
just ask
is
one
rather
last
unusual.
thing? Are you guys very interested in what's happening in Scotland?
We are, indeed. We are for 2 reasons. First of all, because we admire the commitment between the British government and the Scottish government to hold a more than reasonable referendum. That is something we admire a lot, both the British and the Scottish government, for reaching this agreement. But we don't have to hide something. In case that the Scottish people vote yes, this will open negotiations with the European Union in order to see what happens with so-called internal enlargement, which is something not expected by the current European Union treaties. And this is very important because most of Catalans support independence only if this means continuing in the European Union.
Yeah. I think we're out of time. Thanks very much, Jordi Arafat. Big hand.
Thank you.
Well, and we move seamlessly on from the Catalans to the Irish via San Francisco. All will be revealed when we speak to Chris Agee. Hello, Chris.
Hi.
I'm kind of waiting to hear your accent to decide which part of your genealogical background to major on here.
Well, I noticed you're from Belfast. I've
You
lived
can
in
hear that.
Belfast for 35 years, but I never lost my accent. I grew up in the States. I'm one of those people who stuck with their accent. I changed a little bit of vocabulary and altered it a little bit, but the fundamental accent, I'm afraid, remains North American. So.
But you're a poet, an essayist, and an editor. You've got dual Irish-American status. You've got a phone that you
I've
haven't
got a
switched
phone.
off. And all sorts of keen admirers.
I have...
You've got, by gum, that's an
I
old
have
phone now
a
as
new
well, isn't it?
smartphone. A new smartphone, which I haven't mastered yet.
You
So
have to go.
excuse me. Yeah, no, I don't. I'm an editor of a literary journal, Irish Pages. You may know it, and people are calling me all the time, so apologize.
Yes, but you've also been actually very active in the Oran Mór in Glasgow. Tell us about that.
Well, I'm writer in residence at University of Strathclyde this year and next year and perhaps in future. And what I started to notice was organizing a series of readings at the university in the Merchant City. I came in contact with many new Scottish writers, Scots writers. I had known quite a few in Ireland, but being here more or less continuously, staying both Partick and Ormeau Road, I started to notice that virtually every Scottish or Scots resident writer supported independence. Virtually everyone. And I think in a country like Scotland, in which the tradition of literacy, the word, the Reformation, writing, Scot, the whole Scottish literary tradition being so present to the country, the fact that virtually every significant literary writer is supporting independence, so far as I can see and so far as I can ascertain in my personal experience, is quite significant. It's outside politics, it brings into cultural weight, and it should be taken very seriously, I think, by people who are undecided.
So you've chosen your words carefully there, literary writers.
Yes.
So there's certain people, for example...
J.K. Rowling, perhaps, is a
Not
fantasist writing. She's a fantasist writer. She's very successful,
Yeah.
of course. But people like Kathleen Jamie, like Andrew Gregg, like Alistair Gray, like James Robertson, like Meg Bateman, Alistair MacNichol. These are the creme de la creme of actual achieved writers in all 3 languages.
So what have you
They
been
are,
doing
in
about
fact,
that then in the Oran Mór? You've been putting on...
well, we did a
events?
big event. So I organized a couple reading series that were very successful at Bar Gandolfi on Wednesdays at 1 o'clock. We got good audiences, 50 or 60 people. We had a range of writers, mostly from Scotland, but a few from England resident here. And someone suggested to me that I really should do a reading for independence. So I just lined up 10 major Scottish writers from all parts of the country, and we put the lineup together, and it was advertised through the media. We're pretty good, because we are media, we're pretty good at the media, so it was advertised through Irish Pages, and Yes Campaign supported it. And we got 290 people. And or more, and it was a great event, and it was a very interesting mix. I mean, people were reading work that maybe pertained to independence in a more oblique way, but other people like Robert Crawford had wonderful poems on independence in Burns's Happy stanza. So it was a nice mix of direct addressing of the issue, and the sorts of things that writers and literary people can do, which just to talk about what Scotland means for them in some sort of more non-political way. So Andrew Gregg had some wonderful evocations of fishing and being just in Scotland like a member of the family. So it was a wonderful variety of tones and outlooks, which I think moved people in a more beyond politics sort of way. And one of the high points was Neil Acheson speaking about why he changed from not supporting independence to supporting independence.
I think Neil was on the programme here.
He was
wasn't
indeed, yes.
Yes. And put your Irish hat on now. We were talking earlier to some folk about the Polish vote in Scotland, which I think was 100,000 potential Polish voters, which is a lot. Irish voters in Scotland, how many of them are there?
I think that this is a neglected area of the campaign. There are a huge number of people, as you know, of Irish origin, either born in Ireland, now living in Scotland, or going back several generations, like Coates Bridge is famous. And the first political point I would make is that it's very ironic the Labour Party, which has historically, even now, supported Irish unification, but does not support the right, effectively, de facto, for the Irish people to leave the United Kingdom by a vote. It's against the party itself, although clearly large numbers of party members are not of this position.
I mean, the Irish voters in Scotland, when we were talking to Tomek, I think, he felt that Polish voters in Scotland were very likely to vote for independence because of their own history within Poland, what they'd gone through and so on. I mean, could you say, given that Ireland is a quite fractious place still, if you're to take the entire island, could you say that there would be one response or one tendency amongst Irish voters here?
I couldn't say. I wouldn't know enough. But the instinct, of course, is that the Irish vote is tended towards the Labour vote. But I think that there is something to keep in mind for people who are of Irish origin or from Ireland, which is quite important, which is in the north, where I've lived for 35 years, there's two things to say, very significant each one. Basically, all parties are completely silent on this referendum.
Well, actually, I was over and heard Gerry Adams one day opining about it. I imagined that Alex Salmond would be actually quaking in his boots at the notion that Gerry Adams was supporting Scottish independence, but he did.
Well, there's two things to say. The very different nature of constitutional, civic Scottish nationalism and physical force Irish republicanism. And that's perhaps the most important thing I want to say.
Yeah.
You will know exactly what this means. I am a wolf tone Republican. That is to say, I opposed always Sinn Féin and physical force republicanism for two reasons. One, it ethnicized a constitutional question, and because it ethnicized, it made it slowly just a Catholic issue. It militarized it. So militarizing something and ethnicizing it is to take it away from a purely constitutional decision. Also, if you probably know, in the 70s, the talk of people like Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness is that we will drive the Brits into the sea. And they kind of scorned, in effect, those kind of geeky, nerdy Scottish nationalists who were going to do it all constitutionally. But now look at the situation. The reason why the Republicans have been, perhaps Gerry Adams is talking about it now, but for the last 2 years they've been completely silent, is this is a huge historic loss of face. and a triumph, a world historical significance for nonviolent civic nationalism, which isn't even the
You
same
mean the
thing.
independence movement in Scotland?
In Scotland, yeah. There
So
will
we're
be a
saying- we're
vote
saying-
to possibly to leave the United Kingdom without a drop of blood,
Yeah.
without a bomb set off before the project that the Republicans were prosecuting in the 70s is even near realization.
Yeah. And
So
as we said, the history is very different.
history is completely different, of course.
And you're right, that people are, on the whole, very reluctant in Ireland, either Republic or Northern Ireland, to comment on what's happening in Scotland for various reasons. But the Unionists have not been exercising that kind of moratorium, and they've been saying that the situation in Ireland would be aggravated in some way by Scottish independence. Do you have any idea that might be?
I disagree completely with that. I think that the withdrawal peaceably of Scotland from the United Kingdom and the following negotiations would be very salutary for the North. What is the problem in the North now is that there is a constitutional settlement. There's a settlement between the states. There is a settlement even between the parties. It's effectively a grand coalition. What there isn't a settlement, and Lesley will know this, is that the communities have not yet settled. And this model of Scottish, independence will force effectively the Unionists to rethink their relationships, both with Scotland and with Republic, with themselves and with England.
Well, I was at a conference talking about
Yes,
this
I
at
saw
University,
that, yeah.
And that was the general view. The only residing fear that seemed quite a sort of reasonable one in a sense was that there would be little Northern Ireland population, 1.2 million, maybe not even that, sandwiched between two independent countries and a continuation UK with a very slender, border.
This is a huge opportunity. It comes back to what Edna Longley said, that the North has always been a cultural corridor for the interactions between the two islands. In the past, that has created a kind of intensely conflicted British backwater. But now there's an opportunity for Belfast to be the linchpin. Because, of course, the Loyalists see, many Loyalists now, indicated by the large number of Salters flying in Loyalist areas, see Scotland as their hinterland. And Scotland will have left. And they have to reestablish at last, or reimagine at last, their relations with England. Because, as every Scottish writer will say, Scotland was never a colony. It joined up willingly in the Union. And somehow, no matter what anybody says, Irish history has a colonial tinge to it. So I see it very, very differently.
Some even envisage a possibility of a new federal
yes.
of the British Isles, which would bring Northern Ireland and the Republic into some kind of entity with the rest.
A Celtic fringe federation was precisely what Hugh McDermott believed would happen eventually when he founded the SNP. And it is a real possibility. There might be some turbulence, there might be some flag waving, but the PNSI is equal-handed, the state is now in control, the paramilitaries are retired, but there is a huge, it can be summarized. At long last, the Unionists will have to rethink, and at long last, the Republicans will have to look at their history and see how, if I can quote again, the geeky but canny Alex Salmon and the other independent supporters of independence have somehow done it where they didn't. And they don't want to talk about this, and I know many of them, and they don't even like talking about it personally.
Chris, we're so delighted that you do. Dead on.
Fantastic.
Okay,
and thank you very much
Thank
indeed.
you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks very much.
Precisely the kind of, historical, informed, objective assessment we so rarely hear, I'm afraid, in this debate where it's all been reduced to things like currency in Scotland. Nevertheless, you may have been aware that there's a blue goddess trundling around Scotland. It's actually an old army fire engine, which has been decked out in various logos and Yes Scotland graphic design. And the graphic designer responsible for it is leading designer Stuart Bremner. He's going to come and talk to us now about it, so please a big hand for Stuart Bremner. Great stuff, Stuart. You've brought some examples.
I brought quite a lot with me, probably too much actually.
Too much? Well, show us the first one so we get an idea.
Well, I guess I'll show you the fire engine.
Indeed.
It's the spirit of independence, that should be.
The spirit of independence.
Yes. It was Chris Law that approached me about a month or so back, and just he'd seen some work online, and he wanted to use it on a fire engine. And I thought, this is some crazy guy.
Yeah.
But then I actually met him, and he's
He
so
is a crazy guy.
he's crazy, but he's crazy in a good way, I guess.
Exactly.
And he was so enthusiastic, and I thought, yes, this is actually.
Uh-huh.
He spoke about a tipping point, how he thought driving this massive machine all across
Yeah.
Scotland would be a tipping point. So I agreed to help him out, and I created a design for him. Well, I adapted a design, and this is this is a print of it, but this is
There
a,
you go.
That's great, isn't it?
yeah.
It's lovely, the kind of Celtic. Do you know, this reminds me so much of the kind of style that we used to use in Harpies and Quines. You're too possibly
I'm a
young and
little
wrong
bit.
sex to remember that. But it's the woman with the bonnet.
Well,
That's
that was
fantastic.
Oh, Alistair Gray.
it's actually after a Czech artist, I believe, called Alphonse Mucha. I've been working with Yes Scotland since October, but before that I was actually, I was just doing it off my own back, and I
Yeah.
kind of threw myself at them essentially. And they
Tell
liked
me
what
why
I
you
was doing.
chose that as sort
Why
of
did-
emblematic.
you
Because
know-
so many people think of. I mean, let's face it. If there's a traditional view of Scotland, it's always male. It's always the kilt.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Yeah.
really matter if women are in it or not. And that's why, to me, that was so delightful that you
Well,
chose
you
a
know,
woman as the
it was
symbol.
almost one of those moments that, as an artist, you can't explain. I'm sad to say. I can picture the moment. I was walking through Holyrood Park on the way home from my mum's house. Sunday evening, it was raining, of course, and I just thought, I've been making these graphics for about a year now, and they're doing their job, but there's not this spark. And so I thought, I could do whatever I want here. I could choose any kind of designs, any influence I like. And this Alphonse Mucha, he did a lot of Art Nouveau designs in the early part of the 20th century, and it was always women. And just this thing just flashed in my head, and I thought, I could adapt something like this.
Brilliant.
Partly, of course, Alistair Gray's Bella Caledonia.
Yeah, that's very.
That was part of my
Yeah.
thinking. It was somewhere. It was in the mix there, and I
How long did it take to translate that onto this fire engine?
well,
It's a big machine.
Well, luckily I didn't actually have to do that part of
Okay.
it.
Right.
I just had to essentially come up with the graphics and send them to the guys who made the vinyl transfers, who put them on there.
So it's vinyl, so it's actually wrapped, not painted.
Yeah. So the fire engine itself was completely stripped down, rebuilt mechanically, so that it actually drives. I think it only done a few thousand miles in its 60 or 70 year
About
lifespan.
60 years old, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was the 50s it was built. So they rebuilt
Yeah.
it. So
they were
that it
last
could
used actually in the
travel.
firemen's strike in 1977.
Yeah, it probably. Yeah, I can just about remember.
Have you been out and about with the?
I haven't yet.
Blue Goddess?
I'm pretty busy these days. I work part time with Yes Scotland, and the rest of the time I'm essentially working with anyone who I can do work with. And it is essentially every hour of the day that I'm thinking of this and I'm working on things.
Well, have you got anything else in your poke
Yeah.
there?
Sure. As well as doing the day-to-day graphic things, I create. This is an adaptation of the design that you saw, so I tried to make it a little bit more.
She's you wouldn't mess with her, would you?
She looks a bit more a little bit more.
I like
intimidating
that,
in that
you know.
one, yeah.
But why didn't you make her more sort of friendly looking, more kind of I'm delighted you didn't.
It was kind of.
It just was.
It's I guess there's a degree of pride in there. She the idea of Scotia as a woman or whatever. I think she's actually called Fiona. This one.
Right.
We had a competition online, and that was the name that was chosen.
Okay.
And it was. I really wanted something that would be a focal point, if you like, and that would inspire people. Because I really think that good design, good art, it can communicate something that words don't always put across themselves.
And is the Yes campaign being canny enough, do you think, in the way it's using imagery and kind of capturing ideas in one image or one song or one something like that?
I don't think you could say there's one thing of any one thing that does it, because there's such a massive group of people who are all fired up and they're just going, well, I can make this, and they go, I'm just going to do it.
We can make a Referendum TV station.
Exactly. we're all in this together, and we're all just doing our thing that we think this is what I think will help. And so I think rather than one focal point, there's just this.
How do you think the campaign's going?
Well, I think the last few weeks have been a bit rough, but I think a lot of that's to do with the way the media is presenting it to us. I think internally, I think we're all focused, and we've got down about 34 days to go now, and so we are just kind of like, okay.
By gum, that focuses it 34 days.
It's this strategy and tactics, and I think I'm trying to create graphics that are addressing both those. So day to day. If, for example, the local government thing that was in today, we had some Green Yes graphics that went out yesterday that were actually on that subject, that were from the Commonweal statistics. So we're trying to do day-to-day stuff, but also just giving the overall messages, the things that we want people to communicate with people, just the basics, if you like.
Great stuff. Anything else you want to show us for you?
I have quite a lot. I'll just grab one at random.
I'll tell you what, you rummage around because we've actually got two other creatives who will shuffle along in a kind of way such that if you were able to shuffle further along, then Sophie, you might find
this
it
way or
less
that way.
that way. Less what, Jade? Christopher Silver and Jack Foster, come on in. If you all need to sort of hang on to each other, we actually, this is an exercise in male bonding, generally speaking. So three louping gents sitting on the sofa before. Christopher, I'm assuming that you're called Chris is your obviously your non-Sunday name.
I'm easy either way.
Right. Okay. Now, you've been working with Jack on both The Fear Factor, which is a film about Scottish politics, and Scotland Yes as the producer, Jack. You've been working as well. You're a director of Precious Few Heroes. So can you tell us just about just what you've been doing up till now, each of you, and then give us the Scotland Yet idea?
No Gods and Precious Few Heroes.
Yeah, well, the Precious Few Heroes is a few years ago now. I mean, there was quite a few sort of there were just online things, but no budget. So I mean, Scotland Yet was the sort of leap into doing something proper, if you like. Which is all crowdfunded.
Tell us about the crowdfunding then.
Well, yeah, I think it's a really interesting thing that it's now possible to make a feature-length film, to raise the entire budget of a feature-length film through crowdfunding. So that's 739 small donations in total, and I think it's really...
Which raised how much?
£25,000.
Right.
So basically... we managed to do that, and I think there's something really interesting about the fact that we now live in a country where people are prepared to just sort of trust you with the job of making a feature-length film.
You should thank Mr. Amazon for that, perhaps.
Well, perhaps.
It's a strange thing, but because we become so accustomed to buying things, it's probably the case now that the little people can kind of benefit from some of that, albeit it would be nicer to benefit from Amazon's tax contributions as well. But you've got the cash. I mean, what have you? You've got the film, so it obviously all kind of came together. You've been, I know, in some cinemas because you were around near St Andrews, weren't you, at one point? But it's mostly been village halls. How have you managed to kind of distribute it?
Well, basically, it is available on DVD. I happen to have a copy here, available from Word Power Books at a very reasonable price. Word Power Books, by the way, are an excellent business who kind of are almost a sort of Scottish alternative to Amazon and have done a great deal of excellent publishing, and also while encouraging you to boycott Amazon. So they're great on that front. We've also managed to. I mean, we've taken it from. We will be taking the film throughout August. Up to Shetland, to Dumfries, and various different points in between, and that's all just been done at a local level because there's a massive. There's massive interest in it. We're getting to the stage now where almost every night in August we will be showing this film somewhere. And
do you go and sort of squire it, as it were, or can it now leave your tender hands and go via DVD all over the place? Because there's film clubs everywhere. I mean, my wee village in Newborough and Fife, we've got a film club.
It's a bit of both, actually. And just to really emphasise that we will be making it available online for free in its entirety from Monday. You heard it here first. So
right.
That's an exclusive for you.
So just explain to people how they'll access it.
It will be on Vimeo, but you'll be able to get all of the details at our website www.scotlandyet.com, and you can also follow us on Twitter at ScotlandYet.
Right, I'm writing it all down.
Indeed.
Yeah. So tell us a bit, since we sadly can't show excerpts of it, I know there's a lot of people interviewed because I think I was one of them. What was your aim with that? Because a lot of talking heads can sometimes be the biggest turn-off imaginable for any project.
I think it was difficult to know exactly what we were aiming to do at the start. The nature of the referendum and the campaign period is that we were inevitably always going to finish making the film right in the middle of it, so quite what it would be we weren't sure. I suppose it ended up being a documenting of the Yes movement. It was supposed to be more of a documenting of just the general referendum and campaigning, but the No movement is kind of hard to document.
It's a moving target. What's your feeling about how the campaign's going?
I think it's going well. I think that the way it's being represented in the media and the way that it's appears for people who are actually directly involved in it is very, very different.
Have you got much experience in the conventional media at all? You do stuff at BBC or anything?
No.
No. I think that's another thing that is interesting about this. About the story of where the film came from is that we did start. It was from, as you said earlier, Lesley, from a standing start. Really, I mean, we didn't have any contacts in the industry. We didn't have any. We were very much coming at it as outsiders, and certainly based on the feedback that we've had from the film, that doesn't come across. It comes across as, I think, a very slick production, and I think that
just like Referendum TV, of course, which
yes.
is similarly done in a very
absolutely
ad hoc.
But I think that's actually something which has come out of the film itself, is this idea that the general spirit of the referendum campaign, which is that if you don't do it, then nobody else will, and that sort of general sense of empowerment and saying, well, if you don't sort of pick up the ball and
yeah, that's what you've been saying too, Stuart.
It's an amazing moment to be in this country. There's just people want to do their own thing, and like you guys, you just go, well, I'm going to do it, and if I can't afford to do it, I'll reach out to everyone, and people just go, that's a great idea, I want to fund that.
But I wonder,
amazing.
how do you think this would affect the conventional media in the end? Because, I guess it's fine to be able to I mean, do you have any ambitions to sort of, as it were, be taking over BBC, STV or anything like that? Right, I'll take it from a laugh, that's a no. Or that's a no can do. I mean, is it just beyond what you could imagine, because there's those and such as those, and then there's folk who get on with it like you?
I think it's what you can achieve. I mean, as you'll know yourself, what we've done with the film would be very difficult to do through the conventional media. I mean, certainly something we found is that the conventional media is... I don't really buy into the idea of conventional media being really biased necessarily, but there's an obsession with balance, and it's difficult to cover a grassroots campaign of the Yes movement if you can't... There's this feeling that, we must also cover the grassroots campaign of the No movement, and if there isn't one, it's difficult to do it.
Yes, Stuart, this is your moment. Very
Final
quickly.
picture to send us off, Stuart.
Oh, why not just the powerful people, essentially.
Wait, are we seeing that?
Can you see it?
Amazing, in Oslo, in the street, they actually have that coming out of the ground.
Really?
It's incredible, yeah.
Well, maybe that's something to set my sights on.
Go and see it. Okay.
Well, thanks very
Thank you
much
very
to all of you, all filmmakers, graphic designers alike, and once again, scotlandyet.com to find the film, and Word Power, not Amazon. Thank you very much, all.
So, well, we're coming to the end of the programme now, so let's see what the people have been making of it on social media. Lucy Davis has been handling our Twitter account. Lucy. You're doing it on your phone, not even an iPad. Wow.
Very high tech. With sore thumbs. Been tweeting away furiously. We've had a lot of talk about the oil.
Really?
A lot of people being sceptical. They said we've been told for the last 30 years the oil's running out. It's never come to anything, so there's some doubt there, echoing what you were saying. But childcare has been the really big topic on Twitter today.
Has it?
Yep, it has. A lot of people saying the solution, we need a lot more care for children that require additional support. There's just not enough, and not enough for over 12s. We also need to make it possible for children to attend nursery earlier, says Dan Paget.
Good stuff.
So again, the Catalan question's been big. A lot of people making the comparison there, and again with Ireland, we've heard from them. And we've also had a lot of positive feedback about the episode. We hear from Hartime. She says, another absolutely cracking episode. Please carry on after August.
Very good.
That's not a relation of any of ours, by the way. No.
We've
Okay.
not paid her, no, not yet.
Right, okay.
That'll be in the post.
I should have actually said that, because I keep forgetting to say this at the beginning of everything, so I should say it now. Hashtag RefTV is how it will reach us, and if you do tweet away like that, then it will be brought to a kind of interested listening audience by the end of each programme. But anyway, thanks very much for that today.
Thanks a lot, Lucy.
And we're looking forward to tomorrow, and then
Yeah, I'll be back tomorrow, and we're going to have Adam Ramsey, author of 42 Reasons for Independence. He's a Green Party member. Actually ran my campaign for the successful campaign for the Edinburgh Rectorial a few years ago. So he's definitely one to watch. And also the lecturer Simon Pio, former Scotsman journalist, prolific diarist, and I think a pretty serious opponent of independence. So it'll be interesting to hear what he has to say. And we'll also be having lots of other things. Number of representatives of the group Scots Asians for Yes. And really, it's all from us for today. A final word thanks to our generous sponsorship from Sandy Adam of Springfield Properties in Elgin. And thanks, of course, to you for watching. So until tomorrow, it's goodbye from me, Iain MacWhirter, and Lesley Riddoch. Bye from Referendum TV. Yeah, I know. Well,